Hello to all of you. This is an incredible crowd of folks who have gathered here today, and I am grateful that you all have allowed me to come and speak with you all the way from the United States, which is not too far away by air, but certainly some of our policies and issues and the differences between our two countries need to be discussed and need to be analyzed as we move forward. And I am, again, grateful for the opportunity to stand before you and to stand before the new Democratic Party as the co-president of the Women's March organization. I want to also sort of just recognize the NDP for having me as someone who is seen to be by some an agitator. Others call me a troublemaker, but I think I'm a pretty good troublemaker. It's good trouble that we like to get into. And you can sort of blame my parents for that. My parents were activists for all the time that I can remember. They still are today. I grew up following my parents to rallies and protests and all types of activities where community empowerment was at the forefront of their work. I was born in a place called Harlem, New York City. I don't know how many of you know about the good old place called Harlem. Oh, okay, that's good. If you don't, make sure that you visit Harlem one day because it is truly like no other place in the world. And in Harlem, opportunities were few, but the love of community and family was very strong. And it provided all of us, young people growing up in that area, with a certain type of foundation. When I was younger, as I mentioned, my parents were activists. They took me to rallies all the time, and I rejected everything related to activism. I didn't want to be an activist. In fact, I thought that it was like they were locking me up in jail, that they made me go to rallies every single Saturday morning. It was like going to church every week. We had to go to a rally. And I thought that they were really doing me a disservice by raising me that way. But today, I am grateful that my parents took the time to show me that caring about people is something that we all should be doing. It wasn't until 2001 that I got a call that my son's father, my son at the time was just 2 years old, his father had been found in an embankment with bullet holes and signs of torture throughout his body. He was killed due to an act of gun violence, and that feeling that I felt finding out that he was killed has really stuck with me for my entire life. Unfortunately, I learned a very difficult lesson in a very difficult way. And what I mean by that is I knew that gun violence existed and I knew it was an issue, but because it had never hit my community and my family particularly, I didn't think that it was important. And from that point forward, I understood that any issue that plagues our larger community plagues our personal community. The viciousness of gun violence, mental illness, poor health care, inadequate government, funding for public education, not only do these issues have the potential to become personal for all of us at any time, but they have a trickle-down effect, and the damage is inevitable. My experience changed my understanding of what it is to have a truly personal experience that would make me operate in a way that would help to uplift our society. You must know tragedy on your own sometimes in order to feel that you are connected to others in a fight. Sometimes being in this fight for civil rights and justice can feel like a gift and a curse. It is a gift because you are surrounded by other people who are amazing, who really care and want to do great work. But it is also a curse because you are burdened with knowing that there is something wrong and understanding that you have a responsibility to be deeply involved in fixing the problem. You feel the brunt of injustice every day. And just 2 days ago, we saw that in Parkland, Florida, a teenager murdered other teenagers. 17 people, including adults, were murdered by a student who was carrying an AR-15 assault rifle. And I say student. Why? Because yes, he was a former student of that school. But if we do not consider all our children to be all of our children, we can never fix the crisis of gun violence in our society. We do not know yet what prompted this young man to take the lives of 17 innocent people and to injure so many others that we pray and hope will survive. But we know that gun violence in the United States remains a prominent issue, with poor gun laws at the helm of the problem. I read one statistic that indicated that in 2016, the U.S. had the 31st highest rate in the world, 3.85 deaths due to gun violence per 100,000 people. That was 8 times higher than the rate here in Canada. And even with that disparity, we are all, even here, concerned about gun violence. Why is that important? It is important because what I mentioned when I first started, we have to look at what works in other places. So coming to Canada, I'm doing the research necessary to see what are the major issues that concern me and how are you all dealing with these issues here. To me, to find out that in a place like this, with diversity and many issues and concerns, I'm sure you deal with some of the same social concerns that we deal with in the U.S. What is it that you are doing right that we are not doing right in the U.S.? We have to study that and figure it out. We as a people are facing very hard times, and we need more revolutionary thinkers. We need people who realize that there must be a sacrifice that we are all willing to make in order to save the lives of our children. You can be fighting from right where you are. No one is asking you to change your entire life in order to be a part of the resistance, yet there must be some change from all of us in order to ensure that we are a more equitable and safe society. Through my years of working to change the state of injustice in the U.S., I've realized that we have to find a place on the right side of history. And when we do, we will find our activism. And this is really the important part of my talk today. Most of us have found some way to be involved. Many of us work with young kids. Some of us have decided to be educators. Some of us support our seniors. Some of us donate money to different causes, and some of us march. Not because marching solves the problem, but because there is a powerful symbolism in each person coming together from a smaller perspective to make up the larger, diverse story that we need for organizing and standing alongside one another for a collective that is moving in a particular direction, but against the tides of oppression and toward sustainable change. When my colleagues and I were planning the 2016 Women's March on Washington, we had to face some hard truths. We realized that the mere nature of the racial makeup of those of us involved in the Women's March, that had to be out front and center in order for us to show the world that we were serious about intersectionality. So we could not be a part of a march where there was not racially diverse access for all. And I must bring that message to you all here who are organizing within the new Democratic Party. If when you look around, you only see people who look like you, it is not a movement that is intersectional, that seeks to touch the lives of all people. I had to swallow the pill that 53% of white women who voted in the presidential election had in fact voted for a man who had time and time again been disrespectful toward women and dangerous for Black and brown people. And here we were on November 9th, yet again, adding insult to injury, feeling like we had been betrayed, and I received a call to join the Women's March. And I agreed against the idea that so many women had in fact betrayed us, white women to be particular. But what I did was I stopped worrying about the 53%, and I started thinking about the fact that 40% of people murdered by law enforcement were unarmed Black men. I had to be concerned with the fact that 2.4 million people who may lose access to health care if Planned Parenthood lost its funding were at stake. That 50 million children could not afford to be impacted by the loss of government funds to school. I had to do the very thing that white women had not done for us, which was to think of the whole instead of only what mattered to me. When thinking about these particular issues, what I understood is that we may not always agree on every point. And I damn sure didn't agree with those women who voted for a sexist and all the other ists that you could think of and isms that I could call him. I almost said another curse word and I had to stop for a second. I was really not feeling white women that day. And I didn't feel it for a while, and still sometimes today I'm not necessarily feeling my white sisters. But what I realized was that the moment was too important. It was too important for us to miss the moment because we were caught up in where we did not agree versus where we do. So as I was coming here today, people started calling me in a frenzy. There were articles out. There were people saying all types of things about me being a troublemaker and some of the troublemaker people that I know. And they were all concerned about it. And I thought to myself, if we spend our time focused just on that, there would never have been a Women's March on Washington. Because one white woman called that march in her home, and there were many people who said, why should we stand with those who pulled the lever for the wrong individual and for someone who will hurt so many communities? And I thought to myself, this is a moment for us to take our issues to a national stage. And that my activism cannot just be boxed into what I know. It must include those people who are most disadvantaged, who do not care about the percentages. They care about whether or not we will gain power that helps them in their communities. And when that settled into me, I realized that I could work with folks that I may not always agree with, but I could put my disagreements to the side in order for us to do the real work of reaching down to the deep roots of our community and lifting those individuals who need us the most. People like to say that they are woke and that they are activists. And as we are in Black History Month right now, I want to tell you that if you claim that you are an activist, because even if you are in the political discourse, if you are an elected official, if you seek to be an elected official, being like Barack Obama and starting as a community organizer is the most important thing that you can ever do. Because to be an elected official, a politician who speaks on behalf of people that you do not know is disingenuous. So as we are in Black History Month, in the US we are celebrating Black History Month. You all should be taking the time to really understand what we as Africans went through coming here through the Middle Passage. The discomfort and despair that African people have experienced, because true activism means that you will have to feel some discomfort and despair. The spirit of my people says that we were able to sit in at lunch counters and be facing a beating that many people experienced. It says that we crossed the sea in a way that no other community has ever experienced. It says that we walked instead of taking the bus, where many people had to go very, very far to work, but they chose to stand on principle and not to allow anyone to ever disrespect us. That was the spirit for which the movement of civil rights and our journey in general has been for African people. If you want to learn how to stand up and how to be strong in the face of adversity, check us out, because we are true leaders in that area. It is something that we've been doing all our lives, and it is all we know. In the Academy Award-winning film 12 Years a Slave, the actor who played Clemens advised the lead character, who had just been tricked back into bondage. He said, if you want to survive, say and do as little as possible. Tell no one who you really are, and tell no one that you can read and write unless you want to be a dead nigger. Just in that line from a movie, people say, wow, that is so powerful, but can you imagine that that is the lives that most Black people live in this country, in our country, and in most countries? They don't want to talk about who they really are and what they really feel, because they don't believe that other people will pick up and understand their challenges and really work with them as their brother and sister's keeper. That is something that we must change, because if we want to solve the problems that are most really impacting those people who need to be lifted, we have to be willing to put ourselves in real community with others and feel their pain. We have to be willing to acknowledge that most of us have been okay with things as it is and as it was. The status quo was cool. It was okay when certain people were oppressed and other people were doing well and living a certain way. And if you really want to be honest with yourself, you have to ask, how have I benefited from white supremacy? Have I upheld it in any way? Have I supported it? And do I really want today for white supremacy to be able to exist in one hand, while I feel that justice and a free society and a safe society and a peaceful society can exist at the same time? There is no way that those two things can happen equally. It does not work. I'm coming to a close now, and I want to tell you something that Dr. King said that gives me hope. He says, our only hope today lives in our ability to recapture the revolutionary spirit and go out into the world hostile sometimes, declaring eternal hostility to poverty, racism, and militarism. I want you to know, ladies and gentlemen, that your work means absolutely nothing if that is not at the core of it. If what you are doing and what you have met here about today is how to be the best party that has ever existed, if your job of everybody coming to this conference today and listening to these great speeches is how are we just the biggest, the baddest, the boldest, and the most powerful party in the land, if that's all you're talking about, you're not talking about a thing. You should not have wasted your time gathering in this space. The only reason to meet at this moment is to restore some sense of dignity to our society. And the only way to do that is to acknowledge how you have been party to it falling apart. We took our eyes off the ball. And not just in America, but all over the world, people are oppressed, people are suffering. And when you meet, your meeting ought to be about how you address those concerns. So if I could leave you with one thing today, I would say to you that you've got to reach deep. You've got to go far. You've got to have real, honest conversations with yourself and ask yourself, what is my duty? Where have I not been present for people who need me? I say that I'm an activist, but am I a real activist? And is intersectionality at the heart of what it is that I am doing? Am I concerned about those people who are the most impacted and the least talked about? If you are meeting about people and they are not at the table to lead the work, the meeting should be canceled. If you are meeting about people and the people who are most impacted are not at the table, the meeting should be canceled, because the ones who are closest to the problem must be closest to the solution. You have, all of you who are here have a great responsibility. They say in the Bible, I'm a very spiritual person, that to whom much is given, much is required. And the mere fact that all of you have been able to get up today and come to this conference, however you made it here, says that you have power. And I want you to know that the people who are waiting on you are not impressed that you've met in this room. They want to know that after the meeting is over, that policies will be in effect based upon the work that you do that makes their communities and their situations better. When you do that work, when you stand up to that, you will be a party that is worth being talked about. And I believe that in this room, the Spirit is here, because I see women all over the room. And wherever women are leading, the soul is present. Thank you very much for having me here today, and I wish you well.